Welcome, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? It's a little hard because I hear all this background noise over there. So if you can't hear me, just give me a speak louder, please. Um, I am I speaking okay? Okay. Well, welcome everyone. I hope you're not too exhausted. I think it's pretty tiring out there, so much going on. I hope you're having a really good experience today, and I hope those of you who are online are able to participate in sessions, and I want to welcome all of you too. My name is Jackie Levine. I've been participating in the public health panel for a long time, either on the panel or up here moderating the panel. And I love being able to do this every year and meet all these amazing people interested in public health careers. I started my career doing basic science research, working on my PhD. And while I was doing that, I really wanted my research to apply to human health in some way. So I ended up getting an MPH after I finished my PhD. So it was kind of a long journey, but I loved doing PhD. I mean, sorry, I love doing the MPH, the PhD too, but I really love doing the MPH and the work that I do now. I came to the NIH to do a postdoctoral fellowship. And after that postdoctoral fellowship, I transitioned to the Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Genetics at the National Cancer Institute, where I oversee a training program with postdocs and graduate students and postdocs who are all doing something in the area of public health and in cancer. And I just really enjoy doing that work. It's okay. Keep talking. Okay, there's a low. Oh, okay, that's better. All right, so enough about me. Feel free to ask me questions, or come up to me afterwards. But let's hear from our panel. I would really love to have all of you introduce yourselves, take a few minutes. You've probably done this before, so let's go ahead and start on this end. Button.
Hi, everyone. Oops. I'm Lorian Abrams, and I'm a professor at the George Washington University Milken Institute School of Public Health in the Department of Prevention and Community Health. I'm also the Associate Dean for the PhD and MS programs, and so I supervise all the PhD programs and the MS programs that we have at the School of Public Health. And while I'm in charge of the PhD programs, we also have a DRPH program, which is a whole nother set of programs, and I'm happy to answer questions about that too. My work is primarily around doing research, looking at how we can use digital tools to help people change their health behaviors, like quit smoking. The most recent work now is related to AI and how we can use ChatGPT as a counselor to help people quit smoking. I probably spend my time between those three roles of teaching, research, and administration. And so that's who I am.
I already have a ton of questions for you.
Okay.
So I will have the questions here today. Maybe turn off yeah, there we go.
Hi, I'm Maureen Moran. I'm Director of Admissions and Graduate Affairs for the Program in Public Health at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Preventive Medicine. And I'm the one person on the panel who has just an MPH degree, which I got in the 1900s in chronic disease epidemiology at Yale University. So most of my work is teaching in the Master of Public Health program. I also teach in the medical school, and then the administration of our degree programs, which includes MPH, MD MPH, DPT MPH, which is for physical therapists, and we have PhD MPH programs in anthropology and in life sciences, as well as just MPH, as well as MS in epidemiology and MS in biostatistics. So happy to take your questions, but first we're going to hear from our third panelist.
Awesome. So my name is Allie Talon. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a research scientist at Whitman Walker Institute, And unlike my fellow panelists here, I don't work at academic institutions. So I work in conjunction with a federally qualified health center doing research that really focuses on how structures and systems create inequitable HIV risk environments. I have a DRPH. I went to Tulane University School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. I'm happy to talk about my experience there. And then I have a master's of Science in Community Health, which essentially was similar to what an MPH is now. And so something about our institute is that we do take on master's level intern to participate, essentially act as research assistants. So I'm happy to also talk about my experience working with master's level students to essentially like complete practicums. And I'll pass it on over.
And I am Andrea Naranjo Erazo. I work in the Office of Intramural Training and Education. And I'm just here for the people online. If you have any questions, I will be the one reading them for the audience here.
All right, well, this panel is here for you. So I encourage you to ask whatever questions you have. If nobody has questions, I got a whole list of them here, but I do not want to hog the question asking. So please raise your hands if you have a question and we'll just go ahead and get started. If anyone has anything out of the box. I'm gonna, maybe I'll provide some fodder for more questions by asking the following. What got you into public health? How did you pick that field? And maybe we'll start with Allie at the other end of the panel.
Sure, yeah. So when I learned that public health was a field, I was really excited because it was so similar to a lot of the individual values and morals that I held. So ensuring health equity, thinking about social determinants of health and how that affects individual behaviors. So I was really excited when I found public health as a major in undergrad. And throughout my, journey in public health, I kind of dabbled in program evaluation. I did some policy work, but really fell in love with research. And kind of felt okay with the fact that research is a long game. So unlike medicine, for example, where you can treat an individual and see an immediate, let's say, change for the better, I feel comfortable like thinking about what the long game is, and that's kind of what my research is about.
I started out as a food and nutrition major. And my first job after my dietetic internship was, in a sense, in data collection and surveying physicians who provided parenteral nutrition to patients who did not have working guts. That got me really interested in data and statistics, and I decided, since I was going to lose my sublet in New York, I had to go to graduate school. So I took a look at all the different graduate programs and basically looked at the course requirements for each one. And one thing kept jumping out to me was chronic disease epidemiology, which seemed like a really good fit with nutrition. And so then I was 2 years doing a Master of Public Health with a particular focus on neonatology, because I didn't want to play a long game. I thought neonatology, it only takes 9 months, right? Yeah, that doesn't exactly work out. But anyway, my first job after my Master of Public Health was in geriatrics. So I went from one end of the age spectrum to the other, but I still had that same skill set in terms of study design and data analysis. So, and over the last few decades, my career has morphed in a lot of different ways, but I still come back to that study design and data analysis things that I learned in grad school.
And for me, I started out with an undergrad in psychology and really interested in human behavior. And maybe I was going to be a psychologist or go into advertising. I wasn't sure. And at the time, actually, there was no public health major. So I like how the world has changed and now you can be an undergrad who studies public health. I hadn't even really heard of public health. And so when I graduated, I wanted to do something policy related or something about society and societal change and promoting health equity. And I found sociology, and I started with a PhD program in sociology. And after being in the program for 2 years and getting my master's, I said, this just doesn't feel like it's going to change the world enough for me. Like, I just want to do interventions. I want to see how things can change and not just sort of study social phenomenon, which, you know, sociologists also do make things change. But anyway, that was my perception at the time. And so I left the program now, and I actually spent a year looking around and trying to find what could I possibly do with my interest in society and human behavior. And it was my master's advisor in sociology who said, you should think about public health. And at first I was like, no, you know, that health is for doctors and nurses and not really for me. But I came around and I did a PhD in public health and went into it with one set of interests, which was actually related to HIV prevention. But the opportunities were different where I did my training at the Harvard School of Public Health, and I ended up working in cancer prevention, which led me to tobacco control and smoking cessation. And so I've pretty much worked since then on that topic.
Awesome. Any questions yet? Don't be shy. Pick their brains while you can. Oh, great. Go ahead. It looks like a mic is coming to you, which I was kind of wondering if that was going to happen.
It's not possible to make it lighter. Is it lighter over there? Yeah? Because we can barely see you right now.
Go ahead.
Okay, so just to introduce myself, my name is Alexis. I'm currently a summer research fellow here at the NIH, and I'm a rising senior at Howard University. I'm looking to get my MPH after I graduate. So my question to really any of you on the panel, what is probably the most significant change, like as a person that you've had as you've gone through your education journey, whether it's specifically within having the MPH or PhD or really just your respective education backgrounds? What do you think has been the most change? Like, what have you seen within yourself as you've gone through that process?
Anybody want to take that first?
Yeah, that's a great question. So thinking about my studies and maybe just how I've evolved as a person through the 15 or so years that I've been doing HIV research or program development or eval, I think really seeing people as whole beings and really understanding the relationship between individual behaviors and structures that and how they interact with each other, and really trying to move away from looking at individuals as like risky persons engaging in whatever to increase their risk of HIV, and thinking more about what are the structures around them that impact their day-to-day that then lead them to be more vulnerable. So really just like looking at the whole person, thinking a lot about environments and thinking kind of critically about like how there are, as individuals, we often judge others for their behaviors, and really just trying to push people to move away from that and really think about the big systems that really impact how individuals navigate through the world.
I'll take a different kind of answer, which is, you know, when I entered my doctoral program, I probably was in a hurry. Like, I always felt like I just wanted to get to doing the interesting work, and I didn't want to take the time to really, or you know, I was being guided to really learn methods, but not appreciating why it was so important. So now, like in hindsight, I really appreciate taking the time to really learn statistics well, really learn your methods, and how much work it takes to be an expert and really know something well and do it well with those kinds of, with that basis. So I wouldn't, you know, like maybe the methods seem boring at the time, or like the statistics seem hard, but it's worth pushing through and really mastering those things because they'll serve you well later.
And I'm also going to maybe take a little pivot from that and say that there's also really, really the opportunity for lifelong learning. So you don't leave school knowing everything you're ever going to know, because there's going to be new opportunities and new things to learn all through your careers, and you never really know what sort of things will turn up. I had an opportunity to be a small group tutor in the medical school, and of all things, bioethics and medical humanities. They basically needed a lot of small group leaders, and they would give you the curriculum and tell you how to do it. That led me to teaching a course on research ethics, which was kind of some of what I was actually living, which then led me to become a chair of an IRB, an institutional review board that does basically protects human subjects. So all along that path, I have learned things about teaching in small groups and the federal regulations around human subjects protection, and how to develop a course curriculum, and a lot of things that they didn't teach me in graduate school. So do be prepared to be a lifelong learner.
I loved all of those answers.
Yes,
and-
thank you.
And I want to add that I want to add just how much I've learned about an MPH in public health and how broad it is. And I mean, even our panelists, I think, illustrate just the diversity of the types of things you can do with an MPH, the types of topics that can be addressed under the public health umbrella. And I just appreciating the other disciplines that come under public health in addition to your own, and how much can be done when you all work together. I think that that's something I really have appreciated. Not that I'm on the panel, but I wanted to throw that in there. What other questions do you? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Just one thing to add is, as I sit in my administrative position where I oversee the 7 PhD programs we have at GW in the School of Public Health, there's such a diversity in what you can get your PhD in public health and still call it
Yeah.
public health. Like, we have people who are lab scientists who are studying parasites and malaria. And so it's very much a bench lab application of public health. And then we have the data scientists who are really just with big data sets, and the data sets could be NASA data sets with satellite readings of like the air quality versus other types of data sets which are the genomics or having to do with the genome. And so, and then there's the global health people, the domestic people. There's just so many different variations on what you can be studying, and still it's under this umbrella of a PhD in public health. So just put that out there to remind you that it's really broad.
Thanks. Looks like we have another question. Go ahead.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Emma. Something I was kind of wondering is earlier in a session about like getting into a PhD, they were talking about how sort of like the best research opportunity is the one that you can get basically as an undergrad or like an MPH student. And I'm sort of wondering, when is the best time to like make that transition from like I'm doing this because it's the opportunity that's available to like really trying to get into like your area of research that you're interested in, or like is it in your PhD? Like once you get in your career, like when is the best like time to make that transition?
Nice. Who would like to take that one?
I mean, I think that's a really interesting question. I would say that, like, I certainly was guided by the opportunities there. Even after I started my PhD, like I went in with the idea that I'd work on HIV, and I ended up on cancer prevention. And the reason I switched to cancer prevention was because there were no experts in prevention where I was studying, and there was funding, really good NIH funding in the cancer prevention. So I just took that, and then it kind of changed what I was interested in, but it kept the same kinds of lens and, kind of skills I wanted to build. So I think even in your PhD program, you may still be going where the opportunities are. But that's kind of a good thing. It means like you're looking around and you're seeing what's going on and who's doing interesting things, and you're changing based on those things. So that would be my answer.
Other thoughts from our panelists?
Yeah, I've always had, I've always wanted to work in the field of HIV, and I'm so glad that I ended up where I am now. And I know that I probably would feel fulfilled working in cancer research or smoking cessation. So I do feel very blessed that I ended up where I am today. And that said, even during my DRPH, I was doing research in New Orleans on teen dating violence. I did some research in California looking at domestic violence among lesbian couples. Like I wasn't only always doing HIV research, but I knew where I wanted to go. And like I just was persistent until getting there. And I think it would have been okay if I didn't end up here.
Thank
I,
you.
I think you do have to look at or consider that opportunities will present themselves. And, you just look around here and there are people who are doing COVID-19 research who probably did not dream of that 5 years ago, right? So you never really know what is kind of going to drop on your doorstep and be excited for whatever comes your way.
Awesome. Thank you all.
I also just want to say, like, I wouldn't, if you end up in, let's say, an internship where it's not necessarily exactly what you want to focus on, I would really try to just see like the good in it and how it relates to maybe the field that you want to, or like the area that you want to go in, and take anything that's like applicable and translate it, because I think that you can learn a lot about data collection, about data analysis when you're doing cancer research compared to HIV research. Is all kind of applicable.
Ready?
Not sure if this, oh yeah, it's
Yep.
on.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Isabella. I'm a NIAID postbac fellow. This was touched on briefly, but I'm interested in the intersection between infectious disease epi and biomedical sciences, kind of having more of a wet lab experience, but also bridging the gap between global health and biomedical research. Can you talk a little bit about students who have gone down that path and what they've done with their training post graduating?
I mean, I think, so I'm not sure exactly what you mean by the intersection of biomedical research, because I think epi often intersects with biomedical research, but really, the people who graduate with the PhD in epi will work in like many different sectors. Like they could they can go and be a professor in academia, but they could also work at a nonprofit. They could work at a pharmaceutical company. They could work at, there's even, the for-profits, the nonprofits, the government, the think tanks, it's really broad. And I'd say our graduates split between academia, pharmaceutical, and nonprofits, and the government kind of evenly, especially for the epi ones, because they have a lot of different opportunities. Do you have a follow-up question though? Does that answer it all?
I guess less data science and more wet lab bench work.
Uh-huh.
And students who have that global health experience, global health, or like the curriculum from their master's program that they're able to apply to their dissertation project, whatever it may be, but are on more of the research, heavy intensive wet lab research track, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's like pharmaceutical or more research like in an academic setting, I would say.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of one of our graduates from the MPH PhD in anthropology, and it's medical anthropology, and it's very much wet lab. One of our graduates did her dissertation work on the fatty acid composition of breast milk from women in the Philippines. So I don't know if that's like ringing all the bells that you would like to hear. And she now has a faculty position at WashU in anthropology.
Thank you.
There's a hand up way in the back. Anything online yet? Okay, we'll go to the one in the back and then we'll do the online question. Natasha's getting her steps in today.
Hi, I'm Jingjing. I'm currently a summer intern at the NIA. I was wondering, like, as was mentioned before, like the public health field is so broad. There's so many different facets and jobs of like ways of getting involved in the public health field and how to apply it. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about like the different motivations behind the sort of degrees that you chose to pursue, the degrees that maybe you didn't choose to pursue, or like maybe like stories from like your students, like what might motivate them to choose like MD, MD, MPH, or like PhD in public health. And then also maybe talk a bit about how like your specific degrees, like you think how they benefit you in your field, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can start. When I did my Master's of Science in Community Health, the program was really focused on program design, implementation, evaluation. So it was all program planning, analysis, and I thought that that's where I wanted my career to go. So when I was looking at doctoral programs, I thought the DRPH program would be great for me because it takes a bit of a more kind of like applied perspective and it focuses more on program eval compared to, let's say, basic science research. And through my program, I became a lot more interested in research and I actually thought about switching into a PhD. And I decided to stay the course because I was like almost ready to write my there would have been like a few classes I would have needed to take, but I said, you know what, I'm going to keep doing it. I feel confident in my capabilities of doing research as someone with a DRPH, which I think is a little bit unconventional. Maybe it's more common now, but even like maybe 6-7 years ago, the DRPH was like pretty uncommon. And so I've had no issues. Still been able to pursue a career in research with my DRPH, and I think that more so has to do with all of my like work experience and my like continued interest to grow and develop in the field of research. I hope that answers your
Yeah,
question.
that's super helpful.
I think we want to hear definitely from the other two panelists because you both have such unique career paths in terms of your degree choices.
Well, let me first say that my degree is actually called a PsyD, and it's kind of the same story as you. Like different institutions have different degrees, and you don't have to. And it's not a PhD; it's a PsyD from the Harvard School of Public Health. And I feel like I haven't had any issues with it not being like the right letters or something like that. So it's more like I don't think that the degree name so much will limit you. It's more like what you hope to do with the degree and that you get the training to lead you there. And then as far as all the other, I mean, there's so many different degrees. You could get the MD, PhD, the MD, MPH. I work with people who have all kinds of different combinations and we all do the same kind of thing for many of the projects we work on. So it's kind of like it becomes your background, but it doesn't really limit you what you can do. So I mean, you should do the ones that interest you, but know that it doesn't limit you too much, except for like certainly if you don't get an MD or a clinical degree, you're not going to be working hands-on patients. Those kinds of limitations are real.
Yeah, I think that one kind of, you might say, elephant in the room is sort of work-life balance. I completed my MPH and actually had an invitation to apply for a PhD program at the same school, working with a faculty member I had taken some courses with. But I had plans in terms of my life, and I was planning to leave New Haven. And so you might say work-life balance issues, I chose to just do the MPH as a terminal degree and not to go on for any further degrees. And it's worked out.
Great, thank you all. Did we get are you good with that? Okay, good. And let's go to the online question, Andrea.
Okay, so how do you navigate finding and concluding on a particular niche to pursue in public health? Yeah, so I think, yeah, so
So,
how to,
yeah, I'll say it here.
okay.
So they're asking, how do you figure out which niche you want to go into in public health?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I took a look at the schools of public health that I was considering and looked at what the course requirements were for each of the concentrations. That's kind of public health school talk for what you would think of in undergrad as a major. So did I want to do infectious disease epidemiology? Did I want to do environmental health? Did I want to do chronic disease epidemiology or health services research or whatever other concentrations they had, one on social sciences? And in each catalog that I looked at, which was kind of like the course listings for each major or concentration, I kept circling the same ones. So this is in the olden days when it was all on paper, but now you would be looking at your screen. And it just sort of said to me, oh, you really are most interested in chronic disease epidemiology, or in some schools, they didn't differentiate between infectious and chronic disease epi. And there's some overlap. HIV is one of those overlaps. So that's what I ended up in. And I think, kind of follow your particular interests. If everything you see sort of is leaning towards biostatistics as like what gets you really excited, then that's what you should choose. But you've got to look at the course offerings, the course descriptions for each, for the requirements for each of the different concentrations. That's my advice.
Any additional things from our panelists?
Just the idea that when you arrive there, there'll be different opportunities than they look like there are on paper. So, keep your eyes and ears open, go to talks, I remember when I was a graduate student, I joined something called the Harvard Tobacco Control Working Group. And it was faculty from across Harvard in different disciplines talking about tobacco control. And that really changed what I did, because I learned how multidisciplinary it was, and I made connections and so forth. So join things and get involved, and that also might shape, what you focus on.
All right. Any additional questions right now? Okay, we have one.
Hi, my name is Alex, and I was wondering what kind of experiences would be valuable to like an admissions team when applying to a graduate public health degree. Yeah.
I'll take that one since I spend a lot of time reading applications. Some of the degree programs are interested in what background you've had in data analysis, particularly if you're interested in biostatistics or data science or implementation science is one of the newest concentrations that we're not quite ready at Northwestern yet, but we will be very soon. And some other schools have already started that. In other instances, it's based on what your particular, you apply generally to a specific concentration for the Master of Public Health in particular, that you've had some life experience, coursework or volunteerism or a research position that has given you some background in that field, such that you know that you're interested in it and you have a little idea of what it's about. So I'd say that, and again, that sort of is going to be in some ways perhaps following your heart based on the kind of coursework that you've chosen and the kind of summer activities and the like that you've chosen.
And I'll just add that you should list faculty members that you want to work with, like that. When we have a great applicant that doesn't fit with our department or the people looking to have doctoral students, we just don't accept those students. So try and list a few faculty member that you would be interested in working with, that because we, at least when we're reading our at GW, we're looking for that. And the other thing is, we do care about research experience. So we will count that you've had a research experience. We'll count if there's papers published, that you're part of a team that published a paper, not that you're the first author, but if you are the first author, that's always exciting. Or that you've done presentations at conferences, that you've, somehow been involved in the process of research in the past. And those kinds of products are usually evidence of that.
Yeah. We have an online question.
Yeah, and this is maybe more, not a question, but more advice that you can give. It says, I have a background in microbiology, BS microbiology, and I am really having a hard time choosing a niche. Also, getting funding is another of my top priorities for MPH.
That is a big one. All right, who wants to go first?
I'll go first, and I'll pitch the Northwestern's Master of Public Health combined with a PhD in life sciences. And the students who choose that combined degree program most often choose the microbiology, virology, infectious diseases laboratories at Northwestern for their PhD work, and then they're concurrently in the evening doing their MPH classes and the applied practice experience for the Master of Public Health. And sometimes that applied practice experience can be associated with the kind of work that is being done in the lab, although it doesn't have to be, but some people have been able to merge the two together, particularly as it revolves around infectious diseases in the hospital or in patients with disabilities. We have a rehabilitation hospital on our campus, so we have a lot of work with people with spinal cord injuries and amputations and the like.
I'll just mention that we have also an MS in microbiology and the PhDs in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health, but there is an option to focus on microbiology. And there is funding available, but for the MS, it's a lot less than for the PhD. So that's the reality of it.
Where can people find out more about funding opportunities for programs you know of or other programs if you know that?
We're not very transparent as a university. The PhD students are generally fully funded, and then the master's level, including MPH and MS, are partially funded. It depends on the situation. The MS tend to get a little bit more funding, but there's no website I know of or place you can go and see across the country how it all works. I just don't know.
Yeah, at Northwestern, it's very much the same. The PhD students are all fully funded. The MPH students and MS students are mostly very modestly funded with merit scholarships, and the rest is generally loans and personal money.
I remember.
And-
Go ahead.
sorry.
Go
No,
ahead.
go for it.
And I was just going to add that I remember on this panel several years back, somebody mentioning, and I think this website actually exists, Fund My MPH. So it's I don't know how useful it is, but I know I typed it into Google and something came up. So you might want to check that out. Go ahead, Ali.
Yeah, so thinking about at the master's level, there obviously is less opportunity for funding, but something that I did was I worked full-time at a university, and then I got to get my master's for free. So there are ways to kind of circumvent the costs of getting a master's, and I was really I didn't realize that when I took the job at this university, but I was very happy to learn that they do offer that. So I did my master's at night. I didn't have to pay $1 for it. It would have been $60,000 a year for 2 years. And that was like one of the best decisions that I made.
Yeah, we offer that also at George Washington
It's
University.
pretty common if you work at like a major university. Yeah.
Inside tip. I think that's a good one. All right. what other questions are out there? I see a raised hand. Do we want them to come down to the mic now? Okay, would you be willing to come down to the mic? It's right here. Sorry, now we're making you guys do your steps.
I'm sorry, I wrote this down. I'm a student at Rutgers University and I'm studying cognitive science and public health there. And I understand that a really big part of pursuing like a master's or a doctorate degree involves being able to hone in on a really specific part of a larger issue, and trusting that, your work will kind of domino effect and, create a larger impact. But especially since public health is a field that is so like involved with people and like community dynamics. I'm curious as to if you had any like moments in your line of work where you kind of were able to pause and step back and see the like positive change it was creating within like the larger community. Sort of think that Ally should potentially start with this one.
Yeah, so there are a lot of folks in research right now who are trying to do community engaged, community driven research. And I would say, broadly speaking, those types of funding opportunities often don't actually supply you with the necessary funds to implement a project that really centers community and pays them equitably. That said, right now I'm working on a project. Most of my funding comes from the NIH, and I received last year or 2 years ago a community engagement award with PCORI. So that's the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. And I am doing a project that essentially is teaching community, so queer folks assigned female sex at birth, about how to engage in research. So the sole point of the project is to really teach and interact and engage with community and learn about their sexual reproductive health care needs, what are the unmet needs, and teach them about research so hopefully they can collaborate with us in the future. And I have really just learned so much from that. It's like my smallest award. I'm only on at 5%. I work way more than 5%, but don't tell anybody that. And yeah, so I really just love to see how much like I've learned from the folks that I'm working with, and that has been kind of like a nice kind of, it feels different than the other research that I'm doing right now.
And I'll just give a different kind of answer. So my work is mainly in developing programs and evaluating them aimed at smoking cessation. And there was a moment where I saw a bus drive by with one of the names of my programs on the bus. So that's like a moment and it's a program called Text to Quit, and it's been used now by like 1 million people and licensed through GW, and, so helped people in that way. Like I know it's out there. And also when we did the study to evaluate Text to Quit, NPR wanted to do a story on it, and I got to have one of their reporters interview the participants in my study, and they had so many nice things to say. So, that felt really good. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
On the flip side,
Yeah.
sadly, it is very much a long game, and it often takes a very, very long time for things to happen. Early in my career, I got involved in clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease. And I hate to say it, but 30 years later, we have a few FDA-approved drugs, but none of them are very good. So it does take an awful long time in medicine and public health. And, you do have to play the long game. And so if you're looking for instant gratification, look elsewhere.
All right, thank you all. We have an online question, and then we'll go to you.
So what do I do to increase my chances of a successful application since I do not have a bachelor's degree in public health? They have a bachelor's in human physiology in this case. And what are the chances to increase funded admissions?
Well, I'm going to take that one in my role in admissions and graduate affairs. We take people with every imaginable undergraduate major. You do not need to have majored in public health to be successful as an MPH applicant. Some concentrations will have prerequisites. In particular, for example, won't be surprised to hear that biostatistics will expect you to have taken some coursework in calculus and possibly linear algebra. But that is certainly not a requirement if you're interested in community health. So again, you need to look at each individual school or program and what prerequisites they have for their specific concentrations. But it takes all kinds. Public health is a very big tent, and we have people with all kinds of backgrounds.
Great. Go ahead.
I wanted to thank you for doing the panel, and also to ask, could you talk a bit about your experiences, whether with students or colleagues who potentially go into nonprofit organizations, what those organizations are, and maybe what their role in the organization?
So it depends on whether they get an MPH or they get the PhD or like a research degree. Even with our research degree, many of our students will work in a nonprofit. Many nonprofits are aimed at research, like the Pew Research Center, would be an example of a nonprofit, but it's still doing research. So our PhDs who work in nonprofits tend to oversee research or do research themselves, but with a nonprofit entity. Our MPH students do all kinds of things because there's so many different kinds of nonprofits. So it depends on the kind of MPH they choose, like whether it's more community-based and then they choose a community-based nonprofit like Whitman Walker, or they choose like a different kind of nonprofit.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I have an application question that I want to ask all of you that is very current, and especially for those of you who look at applications. What are your thoughts on or policies on using AI for applications now?
Well, we don't have any policies at this point. There's some chatter among the admissions crowd that, it's quite possible AI is coming. On the other hand, some of us have seen some of the output and don't recommend it as your essay writer. Maybe a way of kind of generating some ideas or getting a first draft. But generally, if you're going to work with an AI program, it's going to also need a lot of your input to polish it up to a point where you're going to want to submit it with your name.
All right, good to know. I think is it kind of obvious when someone's used ChatGPT on an application? Currently, anyway. Yeah. Yeah, it's a whole new world. And this question came up recently, just even about like drafting manuscripts, and the NIH currently doesn't allow ChatGPT to be a co-author on a manuscript, but I think there's no disallowance of like potentially, as you said, Maureen, just using something to help you draft, but then kind of going from there and really having an impact on your manuscript yourself. All right, what else do you all have? Okay, looks like an online one.
In regards to doctoral degrees, what is the definitive difference between a PhD in public health and a Dr. PH?
I can share my personal experience, and then I feel like you all kind of have a broader perspective. So when looking at the DRPH versus PhD programs at Tulane, I at the time was not interested in doing biostatistics. And that was one of the main kind of deal breakers for me, to be quite honest with you. In retrospect, going back to what you said earlier about like learning stats and how that's important, I regret not taking more time when I had the time to push myself to maybe do something that was boring to me. And that's just me being honest. I think with the DRPH, they kind of frame it as seeing things with like a bigger or larger perspective, being in like a director role, doing more policy work, doing advocacy work, thinking about systems, even though folks with PhDs can do that as well. And to be honest with you, I've seen some programs like DRPH programs that look like PhD programs, and I've seen some PhD programs that look like DRPH programs. So I think it really depends on the university. I don't know if that was a helpful answer.
That's great. Yeah, at GW, we used to actually have our programs be somewhat similar, but now they're really quite distinct. So the PhD doesn't require, is the research degree, like the premier research degree. And the DRPH combines research, but also with leadership and management and director, training to be a director. So the people who see themselves, and the other is the prerequisites. The prerequisite for the DRPH is 5 years work experience. And so the student body is really different, where the DRPH program is like an older student, often working part-time, full-time, and then doing their DRPH on top of that. The PhDs are more full-time students, younger, less work experience, and who see themselves going into like doing the hands-on research, and the DRPH less so, that they see themselves maybe they'll contract with someone to do research and they'll oversee it in a kind of more indirect way.
Anything else?
Also with the DRPH program, I felt like, so we had to do a pretty extensive practicum. And obviously during my MPH program, I had to do a practicum as well. So it did actually add a little bit of time to my degree because of that added component, which I thought ultimately was like fine. But if people are trying to finish in a certain timeline, there are some programs where actually the DRPH could take longer. But I'm not sure if that's the case for every program. It's not, yeah.
Could those of you who are kind of in the admissions space comment on people contacting universities and what advice you have in terms of, should they be contacting universities? Who should they be looking for? How should they be prepared when they do that, to talk about, like, is this MPH for me?
Well, my advice would be to first take a look at schools that you think you might be interested in and take a look at their website. So have some idea before you ask the questions. Because you'd be surprised how many emails I get from people who say, please tell me about your program, the admissions process, the funding, and what people do after they graduate. And I'm like, you could have looked that up. Have you met Google? But I respond to those emails. I also have office hours once a week. They vary on the day of the week and the time of day, so that I can talk to people in just about any time zone. But and we have a little sign up. You get the Zoom link for office hours from any of our Northwestern public health websites. I'm always happy to talk with people, which is part of the reason I'm here for this. I answer my phone, I answer the emails, and I do the office hours. And I think that probably any of the schools or programs in public health, you're going to find somebody in admissions who is willing to talk to people who have questions about the specifics of that school and that admissions process and that the degree offerings.
And I'll add that at GW, for the PhD programs, most programs will have information sessions, but I'll say for the PhD programs, I'm not, as someone who will be, admitting a student, I'm not eager to talk to them until their application's in. So normally before they actually apply, I will just say, come to the information session. There'll be someone to answer all your questions there from the program, but until they're really serious and they're likely coming to GW, I'm not that excited to talk to them. But then once they're in, then it's like we roll out the red carpet and we want to talk to you, and we spend a lot of time getting to know you, and we interview you and you interview us, and we hope we find out if it's a good match. But because there's so many students and we can only admit like a very small fraction of the students who apply, we can't talk to them all until they've taken that step, and then we've taken the step of admitting them.
Go ahead.
Hi there. My name is Tessa. I'm a summer intern at NIAD. And I'm just kind of looking for more exposure to public health kind of as a field. Are there any books that you'd recommend?
Well, it's a big field. I don't know, Laurie Garrett, The Sixth Extinction. I don't know. There's so many. Anyone have a favorite
Yeah, I
book?
would say Lori Garrett has a very active Twitter. If you want to keep up to date on what she considers to be kind of like the big public health emergencies. Also, classic is Anything by Paul Farmer. That really focuses kind of on global health and international health, and that was pretty formative when I was an undergrad.
Yeah, Tony Fauci, I think, just released a book on his many years of public health at the NIH, so that would be a good one.
Thank you.
This is going to sound really crazy, but I actually enjoy going to School of Public Health websites. I feel like there's so much that can be learned just from going to the website and learning about what people are doing at that school, and just the breadth of really fascinating projects that people are working on. The things that those individuals who are doing today's public health research, the direction they're going. I always tell people, go check out some websites. But like you, Maureen, back in my day, it was a big book, and it's cool. that
Right,
you
and
now
I'm
have
just going to give a little shout out to the Yale School of Public Health Instagram, because they have a great Instagram account and some really interesting and entertaining offerings every week.
Looks like we have an online question. Might be our last question since it's 4:41.
Sorry, I'll repeat the question. What do you suggest a person entering the MPH program to do to maximize their experience?
Something that I'll be quick about this one, that hasn't come up is, so programs require electives. So I would really think about how you want to spend your time with your elective, because you could actually end up taking a class that you realize like, oh, I'm actually super interested in this, and you may have time to actually kind of shift gears with your program. So I think definitely being really mindful of your electives, also really like talking to faculty. Once you're in your doctoral program, you'll have an advisor, but that doesn't mean that that's the only person you can work with. I've worked with 3 different faculty outside of my advisor during my time at Tulane, and then I was able to create really wonderful relationships with those folks. So I think, yeah, being open to opportunities, and then kind of pushing yourself when you're looking at electives.
I totally second all that.
Yeah. Another thing that is fairly important, I think, for Master of Public Health students is to be willing to reach out when things get rough, and not to withdraw and be afraid to talk to anybody. I have far too many students who just decide to ghost the faculty when they feel overwhelmed, when in fact, probably the better approach is to reach out for more help, more lifelines when things get difficult.
Definitely.
Yeah,
And
great advice. I just echo if you have the opportunity to work for a faculty member, it's a great way to get to know them and have that kind of a relationship, and where you just can ask questions all the time, and they'll be there to answer your questions, and you can get exposed to research, and you can see why they're excited about the field they've chosen.
I think that's a great way to end our panel. Did you have something?
So I'm gonna ask one more question that was online because I know the answer is gonna be very quick. Do you need to have a publication when you apply to a DRPH or an MPH?
For the MPH, you certainly do not need a publication, so that's nice.
And DRPH, I would say no, and PhD, no. If you have it, it's a bonus, but it's not a requirement.
Great. All right, well, I think we're at time. That clock is a little bit behind. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thanks for all the wonderful advice, and they're still here physically, so come on down and meet them and talk to them, ask them questions, especially the admissions folks and the folks in the trenches. This is who you have here. So thanks everyone for coming, and thanks for those of you online for your attention too.